first thing we need to do is just set the scene. Now, it's very important whenever we talk about the CPG industry, which we're quite familiar with, is that we have to be very careful about competition and law. So we have this standard compliance statement at the beginning here. It's basically to say that we should not be sharing any information on this call that might possibly be seen as anti-competitive. So just want to check that everyone's okay with that. If you do not feel comfortable, you should drop out now during the CPG business. However, we believe we're going to be okay on this one. So if you can go through this, we'll also have it transcribed and we'll make it legally available to the powers that be to do this. Thanks very much, Ian. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, so I am Adam Dorrell. I'm the CEO and co-founder of CustomerGauge, 25 years experience in the CX business, about 5 years deep experience in the CX business, 25 years, and about 5 years deep experience in the CPG business. And I'm going to introduce Nigel, who's going to be on here a little bit later in more detail as we go through. But first, who are we and what are we talking about? My company is CustomerGauge, and we are a leader in the CPG business and in B2B to help people understand what their account experience is. Basically, to try and understand what the customer experience is in a B2B setting. And to do that, we give always-on customer feedback, we take the revenue in there, and we help the companies that we work with grow accounts through better relationships and upsell. I'm not here to sell you this, but I'm here to talk about how the best in breed are using this type of customer feedback to help enhance them. And for example, these are some of the logos that we work with, and we know that these companies, especially in CPG, are very committed to measuring their channel experience, how their product gets taken into retailers and bars and so on. And we also know that their suppliers are interested in that as well. A quick overview about the mechanism about how we do this. A large part of what we do is based on surveys, but we keep it really simple. It's net promoter optimized. We give deliverability and feedback in as key metrics. And we do this across all of our clients so we can benchmark one against another. We also have a playbook. By the way, we make it publicly available. We make it all over our website. I even have now, since 2 days, have a digital twin. So you can ask my digital twin anything about how this is done. We love to share our knowledge. But we know there are 4 main steps that the best in breed customers go through to achieve better account experience. The first thing that they do is they make sure that they try to cover as much revenue as possible in their customer experience reach out. What do we mean by that? It's very easy to get response rates from surveys if you do it once a year, but the key thing you need to try and understand is how much of your revenue of your clients you're covering. You need to push up response rates because response rates drive engagements. That shows you how much your customers care about you. I believe it's a more important score than a net promoter score. Again, we can dive into that a little bit later or offline. The other thing that's most important, following up that feedback is most important. In fact, I've literally just come off 5 minutes ago from looking at an amazing study we've done internally that shows how different the impact is to improve the score if you do simple follow-ups. And the final thing is you've got promoters. They're saying they really like working with you. These are the people who are going to buy more from you and will be recommending them to other people. It's really key to think about this. It's not all complaint mitigation. The other thing that's really becoming alive in the business at the moment is the ability of AI to make a huge difference on customer sentiment. So the more customer sentiment that you can bring in your business, whether you're using CustomerGauge or another sort of feedback tool, is key, because using AI can make a huge difference about understanding what customers do. And then we can go further. You see these tools allowing you to actually enhance that B2B relationship that you have with clients. In the end, if you're in the packaging business, you've probably got multi-million-dollar relationships with your clients, and how you manage that on a human way is going to be key to success. And one of the stats I just pulled out on here is from one of our big CPG vendors that says that we know that promoters are twice as likely to buy a second product line. And that's really significant. The more promoters you can do effectively, the more you can sell to them. All right, that is a whistle-stop tour around customer experience. I hope everyone was able to follow that. It's not about me, but it's much more about stories from the front line. And now I'd like to introduce Nigel Tordoff, former head of customer experience for Molson Coors. He's been around the industry for a long time. Now he's doing sterling work as the chair of the CPG Experience Council, helping drive a better client experience all up and down the chain. Welcome, Nigel. Thanks for joining me today.
Really pleased to be here, Adam. I'm looking forward to this.
How did I do with my introduction on that? Was that a quick whistle-stop harbour tour of the of customer experience?
It is that the challenge is it's such a big, wide topic. How do you crush it down to 2 minutes? It's really difficult, but we'll have a go at trying to do that with some of the examples because you can see from the slide, I've got 30 odd years of being in consumer packaged goods. And when I retired from corporate life, the opportunity came up to chair the CPG Experience Council. And one of the things I've learned from there, the best way to describe it, it's a group of 8 to 10 different businesses where I give them a challenge every single month or an idea. And we basically crowdsource the knowledge of organizations from all around the world to be able to come up with the best practices. And then just as you talked about with some of the information you provide, this is open platform. It goes onto the CPG Council website, and anyone on the call that wants to learn a little bit more about customer experience from some people who've got combined, we've probably sat with 250 years worth of knowledge of customer experience and consumer packaged goods. So there's a whole host of information on there that's easily available to anyone. And as you talked about with competition laws, there's no expectation of any combined action going forward. It's just there for you to look at and take from it what you think is going to be good and leave behind what doesn't work for you. So lots to be able to share if you get a moment with the QR code on the screen.
Lovely. Thanks a lot, Nigel. Now, you and I, we get together quite a lot. We normally think about the part of the supply chain between the CPG vendor and the consumer, don't we? We think about that, that reseller part, the bars, the stores, the kiosks, and so on. But what we've done today is we've lengthened that supply chain, haven't we? We've gone much further up the chain and maybe even further down the chain to think about that entire supply chain process, because when you're in packaging, that's one of the common links that threads it all together.
It is, and I think that the interesting part is this will only get wider as supply chains become more complex going forward. And for whatever reason, the vertical integration isn't actually the most commercially viable way to be able to run a business now. It's better to allow people who are experts in different topic areas to be experts and to put all their knowledge together. You generate a really broad supply chain from one end, from raw materials all the way through to the recycling at the other, and eventually it'll become a loop in itself.
Let's just take a few moments to think about this chain here. I like to think one of the ways of thinking about it is from tree to trash can, I suppose, or from farm to fridge. So why don't we maybe you can just talk me through some of your experiences, just to go along the chain and point out some of the touch points.
Well, I guess if we start in the middle and you think about the assembly part, which is where most CPG businesses operate, if I got a demand signal from any retailer, the first thing I have to share it with is going to the left with the packaging team. The people who are going to provide the cardboard boxes, the cans for the product, they need to be just as aligned to what we're trying to do when we assemble it all together as I do if I go to the right-hand side to the distributors who have got primary distribution to get it to the retailers. But more than that, some of the raw materials can be in short supply. For example, which is quite prevalent this particular year with some of the harvests are going to be probably compromised in certain countries. So how do you source harvest and raw materials for producing the product from different countries? It's all interconnected. It's a huge machine that runs all the way through. But the one thing that you can't fail to deliver on is the consumer. If the consumer gets disappointed anywhere along that chain, then you end up with a fundamental issue that comes back to bite further down the line.
Yeah, I really like the way you've described that. And then what we see is that companies are sort of measuring their net promoter score along the chain. And let's have a look at that, Ian. We can imagine that if companies along here were thinking about how they interacted with the next block to the right, um, they'd be measuring the score here. So we've put in a couple of example ones here. Typically, these would be siloed, wouldn't they? Because normally, I don't think we see a lot of sharing of customer experience up and down the line.
That's correct. And the interesting part is every one of them are critical. But you're right, we often delve into the one that's just with the relationships I would have as a consumer packaged goods business with the retailer. But
Yeah.
the reality is, I can't provide a great NPS experience and ultimately earn the right to have a great NPS score unless all of my partners are playing a role in that as well.
Yeah. Now let's take a hypothetical situation. You were in the beer business, Nigel, and you told me something the other day which I absolutely love. That because today I'm sitting here, it's 25 degrees. It's going to be, I think, 28 tomorrow, 29. Now, when the temperature goes up for 3 days, what does that mean for the beer business?
Well, for 3 days above 22 degrees is the phrase, which I really do like because that's critical for the category I worked in. I'm sure if you look at other different categories, there'll be different lead metrics that you look at to be able to trigger something.
Yeah.
But the way this works is when we get 3 days above 22 degrees, you get a big spike in demand for drinks. And that's
Yeah.
true whether it's alcohol or soft drinks. I suspect on ice creams and things such as that, the spike is even higher.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is, if the packaging suppliers can't hit that demand when we need it as well, and
Yeah.
say, for example, as you got on here, that becomes a zero. If I've got no packaging materials to put the cans into or no cans to put the liquid into, guess what? Everything from that point fails. So I used to be an accountant many long years ago, and the maths of this is each of those NPS scores, you almost have to imagine they're multiplied together. And in maths, anything that's multiplied by a zero means the final answer is a zero. And I think that's the critical nature of today's supply chains, and particularly in terms of packaging. If your packaging's good, you can reduce costs and you can grow revenue. If you miss a beat on packaging, the risks that go into any business become huge because it just stops everything that happens.
I think this is a really important concept because in a world where there's just-in-time production, you've really got to make sure that further up the supply chain or further to the left, there's flexibility and meeting that demand. So obviously communication comes into this, but also just the ability maybe to help. And
Well,
I love. Sorry, go on.
I was going to share just one little quick tip for the people on the call. One of the things that happens is imagine when you have a sales meeting. The worst thing I think you can do in today's world is to have a sales meeting that just involves the sales teams. The meetings I would have as a chief customer officer would involve as many people as possible. So I'd have supply chain in the meetings. Occasionally, I would have the packaging manufacturers in the meeting, or some of the farmers have been there, depending on the topic of conversation. And we would share as much as physically possible. So, for example, those meetings would start with looking at the long range forecast and trying to predict how many days we're going to be above 33 how many days we're going to be 3 days above 22 degrees.
Yeah.
And the moment you can give that information to the packagers, then they could potentially produce more stock. We could hold more buffer stock, either in the CPG supply chain or in the packaging supply chain. There's so many different solutions, but the real trick is to run these multifunctional selling teams
Yeah.
with as many people with breadth in them as possible. So just as you're looking at getting NPS from the distributor or the retail outlet or the packagers, you want to have those people in the main calls so they can hear and feel it all from each of the different points on the chain.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and thanks for bringing that up. We'll get into that now, but just before we just leave this slide, what I want people to understand is that this supply chain is complex, and it's already quite good if you're understanding what goes on to the left or the right of you, if you're in here. But the real wins are when you can look further up the supply chain to understand a little bit more what happens closer to the consumer or the retailer. So Nigel, I'm going to invite you to talk about an example that you've got from your world about how you've seen that.
Yeah, well, this example happened a few years ago now, so it's out in the public domain, but it was one of the biggest personal learning experiences I had as a sales director at this point in time, and also for my team, where, as you see, as the story evolves, it starts on the left. We got the one thing that nobody wants to see, where that little shelf is on the left-hand side, and you can see the grey on the bottom. You either want grey because you've sold out, which is good, or in this case, we hadn't actually got the stock into the store, and we had quite a few issues that were being brought up by the supply chain director of this particular retailer. And they were sharing with us, we got a fundamental issue that the stock in transit was slipping around. A little bit on the primary distribution trucks because it was card on card, but also when we got it onto the pallet trucks going into the stores and being taken off a tail lift, the pallets were collapsing. Not every single one, but enough to be able to justify, rightly so from the supply chain director, an issue. And we got everybody back in because we got that feedback loop pretty quickly. The supply chain teams did a remarkable job with the solution. They very quickly put film around the cardboard boxes that gave it a little bit more friction. And then they also managed to put a little dot of glue, and a very, very small dot of glue in it that actually mean that all the issues around pallet slippage went away altogether. And within the space of matter of a couple of days, we got the shelves stocked again. So we were all sat there going, job done. We got back on with a day job. But we looked.
Congratulations, job done, right?
Well, we thought so, but this is where the grey hairs start to come. I've got a story for each of the grey hairs on my head. But there were quite a few grey hairs with this because I don't want to say we got complacent, but we thought we'd solved it because we got really great closed loop feedback from the supply chain, done really quickly and worked it through. The issue was we started to have empty shelves again. And these empty shelves started about 4 to 5 weeks later. We double checked everything in the supply chain, nothing had altered with the film, nothing had opened with the glue. We'd had no issues from the supply chain teams in all of our retailers about breakages or slippages. If anything, we were having a 100% success rate, but yet we've got exactly the same problem in a whole range of many, many different stores now. And this was the biggest question. You should never stop asking yourselves why. And if you've asked yourself why in a silo, the little chart you shared beforehand is a great way to go and ask why in another area of the business. Work up the supply chain and work down the supply chain. And this was one of the things back then. We didn't quite have the technology in place to do this quickly, but it does exist now. It's used on a fairly regular basis. But it was a piece of feedback. I encouraged all of my teams to go out to the stores on a regular basis and try and understand what was going on and look at what people were doing actually in the stores, because the journey of packaging, if ever you've never mapped the journey of a pack of your product from very start to finish, you would be shocked about how many times it's touched and moved and rearranged. And it's amazing when you map all of it out. And we actually found, I think as the next slide shows, one of the best quotes I ever had, which was, have a look at my gloves. And when we got store staff in there, it was an interesting thing that we got so many people wearing gloves, putting beer on the shelves, which we'd never seen before. People normally just would have the normal hands and they put the beer on the shelves and that would be done. But if you just have a look at the next slide, we've zoomed in onto that little piece of glue that's on the top of the pack.
Yeah.
Well, that was brilliant for the stability in the trucks and on the pallet trucks and to get it to the back of the store. But you imagine when you're picking probably 300-400 boxes of beer up on a shift, and you get a little bit of glue that transfers from the packaging onto your hands every single time.
Yeah.
And your hands become sticky, and then everything you touch becomes sticky. We actually ended up with an issue where the store staff didn't enjoy putting our product on the shelf. So guess what? When there's very competitive marketplace and there's 20 beer suppliers in any single grocery store, guess who got built last? We did, because it's the one they didn't want to do. They might as well do it at the end of the shift, because they only then get sticky gloves once rather than at the start of the shift when they've got to throw the gloves away, and it creates another problem into the retailer. Whereas now, when you look at what happens within the most CPG categories, you gain feedback from the buyer, you gain feedback from the supply chain, from the raw materials, you gain feedback from the distributor, you gain feedback from the stores on a pretty regular basis. Because unless the whole of that chain works, it's impossible to be able to get the right things with your packaging. And packaging is a wonderful solution, whether you can see on the left, new, free, win or value are the 4 famous words that consumers respond the most to. but they don't respond at all if they have to get themselves covered in glue. And it's covered in glue is an exaggeration for the consumer, but for the store staff, when you're touching it 400 to 500 times a shift, that makes a big difference.
It's a really good story, Nigel. It's almost like the unintended consequences of fixing something that looks great as a solution, and then it doesn't have the intended consequences. How did you actually go around solving this, if you're able to talk about that?
Well, the solve was another solution. It went back to card. You can change the friction on the card that you actually produce from the packaging suppliers. So instead of it being really, really shiny, which means it's slippy, you just change the tone of the card a little bit. So that gives you another solution. We also found with a palletizer, one of the things that was an unintended benefit that came out of this that had a big impact in terms of revenue growth from packaging. We actually got the palletizer reprogrammed so it could put the packages onto the pallet so that the store staff didn't have to rebuild them at the front of the store to be able to see the promotion that was on the pack of beer. Well, if you imagine that going back to a retailer, the power of that, if you've got some illustrative numbers, 600 stores, and you've got a display that's being built four to five times a week, that takes an hour. Well, that's 7 days a week, that's 7 hours for each store multiplied by 600 stores. That's 420 hours. Sorry, 4,200 hours, sorry, that you're generating a week back to the retailer from not having to build displays. And all that came out of making this mistake that just challenged us to really think differently about what the solution could be. And the intent when we got the impact from the store staff was how can we reduce the amount of times the store staff have to touch the product? So anything that's a display, how could you pre-build the display on a palletizer, for example, automatically in the packaging line of the brewery, rather than having the store staff touch it? So it changes the way you think. You think about every location in that supply chain. How can you make it easier for the packaging suppliers?
Well, that's a really a great way to get into our next story, actually. If I can lead this one, because you're talking about making it easy for the people on the shop floor. Here's an example from. Actually, I took these photos of Nigel. I know this is a common thing for you. This was in a limited assortment retailer. I'm not going to tell you which one. It's Aldi or Lidl, that sort of thing. But they've got very specific metrics on the shop floor, haven't they?
They have. Well, there's 4 metrics that discounters generally use. They might use slightly different terminology, but I'll just give you the 4 and then link it back to how packaging affects every single one of those metrics. The head office staff are responsible for the revenue that's generated because they decide which products get listed and how much gets listed in how many stores. So they give you the depth of the range. So their first target in the head office is revenue generated. And their second target in that office is the margin that's generated from it. So have you made 100 million and you've made X% margin? They're the
revenue
two
margin.
revenue and margin. They're the only 2 things that the head office is responsible for. And what I love about the discounters, they cut down the metrics to just 4 and take out all the noise that surrounds it. And then in the stores aren't responsible for revenue. The stores are responsible for making sure that the key lines are available on the shelf at all times. Because they can't sell anything if the stock's not on the shelf. And that's the 3rd metric. And the 4th metric they have is how many staff hours does it take to be able to get all the product on the shelf? So they're managing the cost of putting the stock on the shelf by the staff hours.
And so that plays into having really efficient ways of getting the product on the shelf.
Yeah. So if you let's take a simple example. You can see on, well, there's some good and bad examples. If we look in the middle, you can see the confectionery where you've got the boxes where it's ripped down. You can see on the second picture on the left, you can see all the fronts of them taken down. The illustration there in confectionery, if you could have a box that could hold 12 items or a box that could hold 20 items, think about what you would do. You would take the 20 items all day long because you can get more product on the shelf by putting one box on there. So it takes less replenishment. So it's going to be available for longer. So KPI number 3 achieved. Is it on the shelf? KPI 4 achieved because it's taken less labor hours. KPI 2 number achieved, which is the gross margin percentage, because the more you put into the box, the less packaging you need. So your
Yeah.
margin should improve, which means by default, you've achieved KPI number 1, which is grown revenue, because you've got no out of stocks and it's been available for longer.
Yeah,
So
that's a really nice thing.
packaging just connects everything together when you get into the retailer's metrics and you think about how the consumer is going to respond.
Yeah, let's just finish off this story because I got one comment back from the client. He said it looks like a rat has eaten the packaging, and the next shot shows exactly this. Look, this is, I
Oh,
think,
yeah,
it's
perfect.
like the two things here is that you can see that some of the manufacturers are doing a really good job. I think Ferrero with their Mentos packaging looks great, but Mars with Snickers, I mean, it's
Well,
not a good example.
well,
And then
let's
the
pick out a couple of things if we could, because
yeah,
there's a few on that picture. First of all, look at the size of the barcode
yeah,
against Snickers. That the consumer doesn't care about the barcode. Put the barcode at the back. The barcode's great when it gets logged into the store or logged through primary distribution, but you're not going to sell anything with a barcode.
yeah,
But the second piece is every single retailer has got fairly standard fixtures. So on this particular retailer, if you look at the size of the shelf in front, the grey shelf with the white price markings on there, I can't guess accurately what that is, but that's probably something like 15 millimeters. No, not would be 50 millimeters,
150 millimeters.
150 millimeters high, maybe 120, who knows? But it will be different in each retailer.
Yes.
The last thing you want to have, if you look at the Mentos picture, you want to make sure your brand is perfectly visible above that shelf line, because that's what's going to make it easy for the consumer to be able to find it.
Yeah.
You'd want to make sure that when the staff are pulling the top off or the front of the box, like you've got on the Knoppers one and the Dove one, you can just catch the perforated edges that make it super easy. So with one rip, it comes all the way up. But if you don't put perforated edges on, you get what happens on the Snicker example. Or you
Yeah.
get what happens on the Twix box, which is just completely the wrong shape for the shelf. Or you look at you've got I think, is it Smiths or Tic Tacs on the left on the bottom shelf next to the Kinder?
They're a bit hidden.
It could be, but look how
We could really dive into this.
it's everywhere. Packaging is some of this is wonderful, but there's too many failures on there on packaging, which means you've failed on revenue, you've failed on gross margin because you could have a bigger box, you've definitely failed on availability,
Yeah.
and therefore you're increasing cost of hours for the store staff. So,
And before we leave this slide, what I want to make the point on it is that it might not have been immediately obvious to, in this case, Mars or you know, or your company before more, because if you're dealing with the head office only, you don't get the visibility further down, further towards the consumer on the supply chain. So I guess what one of the things I'm really arguing for here is it's the more you can have visibility along that supply chain, the better. And I got to be honest, there's no magic solution for this apart from trying to break down the silos. But you have to start from somewhere, don't you?
well, I think you do. I mean, the way that businesses now seek feedback from a head office or from a buyer, and they get pretty disciplined in their organization, but when they got feedback and it's a detractor feedback, so we close a loop within 48 hours, are all great things. But imagine, could you say that the same way you collect feedback from the head office with a retail buyer, do you do the same from your packaging supplier? Do you do the same from, in my case, the farmers that produce the raw materials?
Yeah.
Do you do the same from the distribution teams that deliver the product? Have you got have you gone as broad as you've gone deep in that area? And if you look at the illustration now, that one of the biggest areas to gain feedback is in store staff. They are the last people who touch the product before the consumer gets it. And everything else you do up to that point can be a great success. But if you fail with the store staff, hence my illustration earlier on with the glue on the boxes, or here where there's no perforation, so it just gets ripped and thrown on the shelf, because as far as the store staff are concerned, then it's on the shelf and it's not taking me a great deal of time. I've hit my 2 metrics. The store manager is not going to get onto my back because I've done what they've asked me to do.
True.
But in execution, that could be executed so much better.
Yeah, that's really good. I realize we sort of focused maybe a bit on outer packaging here, but it's the same story, isn't it, for any type of
Yeah.
consumer packaging or whatever. So now, a couple of things just to wrap this up here. Packaging drives higher loyalty. But what I want to do, if you're a packager, how can you understand your own loyalty and you're working with people, because it's really important to get this in here. So I've put together 5 areas for companies to work on in order to get a competitive edge. So I'll just run through this, Nigel. Jump anything. By the way, if anyone's got any questions or things they'd like to just put them in the chat below, we'd love to answer them for the last few minutes. But real-time feedback can have a transformational effect on businesses. We've seen this up and down there. Number one, you can catch issues early. I think these 2 examples are perfect, Nigel, because they're way upstream of any sales that might do. Why are we not selling enough beer? Well, they don't want to make up a nice display because of the glue. Getting the real-time insights into your business can help with what we call fast-track improvements. Obviously, there are ways, you get feedback in there, you make strategic plans to change them. Things you cannot change overnight, you're going to work on them over a few months. But you can find out from clients to get a little bit more feedback, or how are we doing on this? That builds the relationship, and in the big relationships that packagers have got with CPG companies, that's crucial. The result of this, responding fast, means you get a better customer loyalty. Normally we can measure that with Net Promoter Score, and the outcome of that is normally increased sales. A couple of other quick. Yeah, go ahead.
So two quick builds which enhance what you've shared across there. On the top 3, on the top line, I'd give the nudge to say all those things are true, but do it for more parts of your supply chain than just one area. So go broad in what you're looking to be able to do. And the second bit I'd say across the top 3 is you won't have fixed it unless you've changed processes along the way. So just fixing it for one issue is great, but until you've changed your business processes or your standard operating procedures, you've really not solved the issue as it goes forward. Yeah. And on the bottom part, there's nothing better than your frontline teams being able to talk about things they've done to make the situation better than actually trying to be on the back foot walking into a problem. If you're walking into a problem with any customer, it's really difficult to sell them anything when you're trying to resolve a problem.
Yeah.
But when you're walking into a customer with, here's the 5 solutions we put into place to make your life better, to make you more money, to lower your costs, it's a much easier way to be able to sell a solution on top of that to amplify it, because it's backed up by the data. These are the systems we put into place. This is the impact we've seen on these customers. So keeping that communication going all up and down the supply chain, and particularly if you're in packaging or in raw materials, you want to hear what's going on with the assembler or the CPG brand owner, or what's going on with the retailer. The more you can communicate both good and bad issues that you've had and the solutions you put into place that are long-term fixes, so it's not, oh God, here we go again, we made the same mistake twice. That's the worst mistake to ever make. Whatever that mistake is, just don't make that mistake twice. So a couple of bills, but they just amplify the 5 things you've already got on the screen.
Yeah, I love it. And my final takeaway is you can never have such a thing as too much feedback. This is the thing that the voice of customer really helps.
Yeah.
We're really bringing in and discussing it. Okay, listen, I think that wraps up the formal part of our presentation here. If you want to know more about this, we've got a contact in the chat that we'll have in there. Speak to Mariana. She can take your query further on, and she'll arrange more discussion with Nigel or myself or other folks in our business. But we do have a few questions to take. Nigel, I don't know if you can see the Q&A tab that you've got. Maybe we can tackle them together. Let me try and give you one here. Okay. Number one's really like, what's the best way to figure out what touch points in your supply chain could be prioritized for collecting feedback?
I think that the simplest way to do this is just follow the pack, whatever the product is, follow it from start to finish. And by that, I mean physically follow it. In my career, I learned more than anywhere else than when I was sat on the packaging lines. And you just ask the questions, why? Why do we do that? Why do we do this? Or you walk into the stores. So sometimes you just have to be brave and go, I need to learn a lot more personally on this. So I'm just going to follow the pack of beer all the way through. I learned a huge amount from being on the drays and on the trucks, and then going into the back of the stores. And the first time I learned how to use a pallet truck, I realized how difficult it was and how we had to protect the corners of the packs of beer, because that's why we got a lot of breakages. So sometimes you just have to go and experience it as the product experiences it from one end to the other. And very quickly you'll work out, just from the noise that you hear, the feedback you hear that comes back. You'll also get a good gauge from when you started to get feedback done electronically through surveys. Just, I can't emphasize enough to read all the pieces of feedback. You'd be amazed about what little snippets are in there.
Yeah.
Quite often you have to read between the lines a little bit, but some of the stuff you showed at the very front, you've just got to remain curious. That's the one behavior in all of this. So if you think you know everything, it's time to leave, because there's always something to be learned. So that'd be my advice. Just get out there and experience it with your hands on first, and you will very quickly work it out. And it's often not the obvious things. So if you find something obvious, it's because everybody knows about it. It's you find those little things where it just amplifies as it goes forward.
That's a really nice one. Let me ask you a sort of a follow. It's a related question. It's quite good for this. Is that question I asked? How do you handle feedback collection when you're dealing with multiple stakeholders in the supply chain? Because they might have in the question says different perspectives, but I could see that happening. There is some tension between these two things. You and I spoke about environmental considerations, for example. There are some tensions about how the product should be delivered, carbon footprint, and so on. How can you balance that, do you think, along the supply chain?
I love this question. The first response is, tell me more. Whenever you walk into a situation, whether it's the CEO or it's the senior buyer or it's the buyer or it's anybody in an organization that is prepared to give you feedback because they are gruntled, the emotions gotten to the point where they've given you some difficult feedback. The first thing to ask for is tell me more. And once you've done that, tell me more again. What else do you think the consequences of that are? What else does that trigger in your organization? Use it as an opportunity to find out as much as possible. The second bit I would do then is play back to that individual what you just heard to check understanding, because it's amazing what you can hear and what they meant to say or what the real issue is. So play it back to them. So you know exactly what you've heard. And then the third bit is make a commitment to do something with what that information is. That could be go to another part of the supply chain to find out what the implications are for them. It could be pulling a team together to be able to ideate on the solution through crowdsourcing from many different areas of expertise. It could be a whole host of things, but tell me more, play it back to them, and make a commitment to do something with it. It'd be the first three things that would do whenever anybody gives me feedback when there's an issue.
I love it. I think that's a great quote. And I think it's also a great place to end it on. We've run out of time today, Nigel, but
sorry, I talked too much.
No, not at all. We're absolutely. I want to say thank you so much for your contribution today and your stories about the supply chain. Really, it's fascinating to think about this with your perspective. I want to thank you so much. Everybody else who attended the webinar today, really appreciate it. And if you've got any more questions, the team will be happy to answer them offline. Thank you so much. We'll see you again another day.